Lesson 13, I will use measurement tools to convert mixed number measurements to smaller units. All right, so let's just go right straight to our problem set today. And you can see that we have a tape diagram and we also have a number line. And if you take a look at this tape diagram, and if you were to count all the boxes, or if you take a look at the number line, you can see that this whole has been divided into 16 parts. This whole isn't labeled, but this whole represents 1 pound. So if I wanted to come up here, I could do this, and I could say 1 pound. So 1 pound is equal to 16 ounces. So if we divided it into ounces, we would say 1 ounce would be the same as 1/16 of a pound. Okay, so if I had a half of a pound, so if you were to cut something in half, half is always in the middle. So half of 16 would be 8. So if I had 8/16 of a pound, that would equal 8 ounces. Okay, so let's think about a fourth of a pound. So what if I took this 16 and I divided it into 4 parts? Well, how much would be in each part? Well, this would be a fourth, this would be a fourth, this would be a fourth, and this would be a fourth. So if I had 1/4, which would be right here, I would have 4/16 of a pound, which would be equal to 4 ounces. Now, if I had 3/4, so if this is 1/4, then this would be 2/4, and this would be 3/4. So 3/4 would be equal to 12/16 of a pound, which would be equal to 12 ounces. All right, so what if I divided this into 8 parts? So if I took 16 and I divided it into 8 parts, I would have 2 in each part. So 1/8 would be the same as 2/16 of a pound, which would be equal to 2 ounces. So if I had 3/8, so if this is 1/8, and then I go over 2 more, then this would be 2/8. And if I go over 2 more, this would be 3/8. So 3/8 would be the same as 6/16 of a pound, which would be equal to 6 ounces. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at the next part. So now we have draw a tape diagram to show that 2.5 ounces is equal to 2.5 pounds is equal to 40 ounces. So let's go ahead and draw our tape diagram here. And I'm going to go ahead and draw my tape diagram to represent 3 holes. Since if I'm going to have 2.5, I'm going to have to go ahead and have, that would be almost 3 holes, right? All right, so this would be 1 pound. So I'm going to label this 1 pound. This would be 2 pounds. And then I'm going to do a half. And then this would be 1/2 of a pound. So this represents 2.5 pounds. I probably shouldn't label this 2 pounds. I should label it 1 pound. That's misleading, isn't it? That doesn't have a total of 2 pounds. I was thinking that together that makes 2 pounds, but it's 1 pound by itself. So I've got 1 pound, 1 pound and a half, so 2.5 pounds. So how many ounces are in a pound? 16, right? So this would be 16 ounces. This would be 16 ounces. And then what would be half of 16? 8 ounces. So if I added 16 and 16, that gives me 32. And 32 plus 8 equals 40. So 2.5 pounds is equal to 40 ounces. And I could even do this if I wanted to go ahead and represent that this together equals 40 ounces. Okay, so now let's talk about time. So you can see that we have a number line. Ooh, I'm glad that they didn't make us draw this, that they drew it for us. But you can see that this hour has been divided into 60 equal parts, and each of these parts is representing 1 minute. So if I had 1/60th of an hour, that would be how many minutes? Well, 1, right? If I had half of an hour, what do you think? Well, half is right in the middle. So that would be 30 out of 60, which is equal to 30 minutes. Well, what about a fourth? Well, if this were a half, remember a fourth is half of a half. So if I took this half and divided it in half, I'd be right here at 15. So 1/4 would be equal to 15 60ths of an hour, which is equal to 15 minutes. Which, if you think about it, a fourth is also called a quarter. And if you've ever heard someone say it's a quarter till or a quarter after, they're always referring to 15 minutes. Now it says draw a tape diagram to show that 1.5 hours is equal to 90 minutes. So I want you to think about how could you do this by yourself. You could look back at what we just did when we were talking about pounds and ounces and see if you could draw a tape diagram to show that 1.5 hours is equal to 90 minutes. So I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to answer it, and I want you to pause the video and I want you to answer it, and then we'll come back and check together. Okay, so I hope that you took the time to try to do this all by yourself. This is what I came up with. So you can see that my tape diagram, I divided it into 2 parts total. So I had an hour and then I had a half of an hour. Well, there are 60 minutes in an hour and there are 30 minutes in a half of an hour. So altogether, this would be an hour and a half or 90 minutes. I bet you did that one all by yourself. All right, let's take a look at the back side now. All right, so now we're going to be converting from pounds to ounces or from hours to minutes. And we can use what we did on the other side to kind of put this together. Or we can kind of come up with using a number bond would also work too. So if I have 1 1/8 ounces, well, first of all, or 1 1/8 pounds, well, a whole pound is equal to 16 ounces, right? So if I had an eighth of a pound, do you remember how many ounces that was? You could always go back like this, and we can come back over here and we can say, okay, well, an eighth was equal to, let's see, do I have an eighth? Oh, an eighth was equal to 2 ounces. So when I come back over here, I can say 16 ounces and 2 ounces, and together that would be equal to 18 ounces. All right, so what about 3 3/8 pounds? So how many ounces would be in 3 pounds? Well, that would be 16 times 3, right? So 16 times 3 would be 48. So I'd have 48 ounces. And then if there are 2 ounces and 1/8 of a pound, then how many would be in 3/8? Well, that would be 6 ounces, right? So 48 plus 6 would be 54 ounces. All right, so let's take a look at number 5. Or excuse me, number C, I was thinking 5. All right, so if I have 5 pounds, that would be 16 times 5, which would be equal to 80 ounces. So I have 80 ounces. And then I have 3/4. So how are we going to figure out how many are in 3/4? Well, there's a couple of ways. I could look right back to where I was looking before, and let's look right here. So here it is, 3/4 is equal to 12 ounces. All right, so I've got 80 plus 12 ounces, which altogether gives me 92 ounces. All right, so now I have 5.5 pounds. So I already figured out 5 was 80, and a half is pretty easy, right? You just think of what's half of 16, and that would be 8 ounces, and 80 plus 8 would be 88 ounces. All right, so now we're switching to hours and minutes. So I know that there are 60 minutes in 1 hour. Do you remember how many minutes are in a fourth or a quarter? Well, a quarter of an hour was equal to 15 minutes. So when you add that together, you get 75 minutes. All right, see if you can do F all by yourself. Pause the video and see what you can come up with. The worst thing that happens is you get it wrong, and that's okay. We'll just erase and we'll work on it together. So pause the video now and try to do it by yourself. Okay, so hopefully you already did this by yourself, and we're just going to check. So I'm thinking to myself, there are 60 minutes in an hour, and I know 6 times 3 is 18, so 60 times 3 has to be 180. And I know a half an hour is 30 minutes, so now all I have to do is add these together, and that gives me 210 minutes. And you can see I didn't label these minutes. I just did that because it was kind of getting a little bit tight. All right, let's take a look at the next one. All right, I'd like for you to try to do G and H all by yourself. So let's pause the video, try to do these two by yourself, and then come back and we'll check together. Okay, so let's look at G. Well, I knew that there were 60 minutes in 1 hour, and 6 times 2 is 12, so 60 times 2 would be 120. And then a fourth of an hour is still 15 minutes, so now added together, I got 135 minutes. All right, for H, I knew 5 times 6 was 30, so 5 times 60 had to be 300. A half an hour is 30 minutes, so together that's 330 minutes. All right, now let's transition to yards and feet. Okay, so remember, there are 3 feet in a yard. So if I've got 3 yards, then that's going to be 3 times 3, which is 9. So this is going to be equal to 9 feet. And if I had 1 out of 3, if I took a yard and I divided it into 3 parts, like this, if there are 3 feet in a yard, then 1/3 of a yard would be equal to 1 foot. So 1/3 would be 1 foot. So together that would be equal to 10 feet. All right, so let's take a look at the next one. So 7 2/3. Well, 7 times 3 would be 21. And then 2 out of 3 would be 2 feet. So together that equals 23 feet. All right, now let's talk about gallons and quarts. Do you remember how many quarts are in a gallon? Well, there are 4. So if I have 4 gallons, that would be 16 quarts. And then what would be half? Well, half of 4 would be 2. So that would be 2 quarts. So together that equals 18 quarts. All right, so let's take a look at 6 3/4. So 6 times 4 would be 24 quarts. And then if I had 3/4, so if there's 4 quarts in a gallon, so let's think about this in terms of this. So if I took my gallon and divided it into 4 parts, and there are 4 quarts, and each of these was a quart, if I had 3/4, I would have 3 quarts. So 24 and 3 makes 27 quarts. All right, so last but not least, now we're doing feet and inches. So remember, there are 12 inches in a foot. So if I have 5 feet, that would be 12 times 5. Do you know what 12 times 5 is? It's 60. So I've got 60 inches. So if I took 12 and I divided it into 4 parts, because these are fourths, so let's think about this for a minute. If I had 12 and I divided it into 4 parts, so how much would be in each part? 3, right? 3, 3, 3, and 3 make 12. So if I had 3 out of 4, that would be equal to 9. So 3/4 of a foot is 9 inches, and together that equals 69 inches. All right, last one. So now I've got 8 times 12. Do you know what 8 times 12 is? It's 96. So I've got 96 inches. So now I've got 12 inches, and I'm going to divide it into 3 parts. So what would 12 divided by 3 be? Well, that would be 4, 4, and 4. So if I had 1/3, that would be equal to 4 inches, and 96 plus 4 would be equal to 100 inches. So in this lesson, we went from larger units to smaller units. So every time we went from smaller numbers to bigger numbers, because when you go to those smaller units, you're going to have more of them.